He talks whenever he writes and teaches his students to write, he comes up with a what if proposition. And all of a sudden, it's just what if, and the what if can be whatever you want it to be. So lickety split is an atonal funk tune. Okay, and so his what if proposition is, what if Schoenberg and James Brown co-wrote a composition? So that's it, right? Exactly, right?
This is Professor Mike Tomaro. He's the Director of Jazz Studies at the Mary Papert School of Music at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, PA. He is an incredibly accomplished jazz composer, arranger, and improviser, having 4 nationally released recordings under his own name, has been featured in 2 Grammy Award-winning albums and 1 Grammy-nominated album, and has performed with the likes of Dave Liebman, Wayne Bergeron, Ernie Watts, Mike Stern, Randy Brecker, and more. He also has over 200 different arrangements and compositions published on Hal Leonard, Doug Beach Music, and Walrus Music, because this man is an absolute wizard of a composer. No joke, guys. Mike Tomaro's stuff is consistently top-notch. I actually just got a CD of him with the Three Rivers Jazz Orchestra called Nightowl Suite, and it is just amazing. All the charts are either composed or arranged by Mike Tomaro, and if you're interested in big band in any sense of the imagination, I highly recommend this album, really. It's one of the many reasons why Mike Tomaro is such an inspiration to me. When it comes to arranging and composing for big band or little big band or combos and everything like that, Mike Tomaro is one of my heroes. And I had the very fortunate opportunity to give him an interview this past Sunday. It was originally for a school project. We were assigned an interview with someone whose profession is in our preferred career path. Can you guess who I chose? No, I wasn't getting my hopes up, but I decided to send him an email. Real professional and all, definitely not fangirling all about him. Truth be told, I wasn't expecting him really to get back. I was expecting him to be really busy and everything like that, but he did. And here we are. The moment of truth.
Hey, Francesco, how are you?
Hi, I'm all right. How are you?
Good, man. It's nice to meet you.
Good to meet you too. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. First off, how are you today?
Good, man. I'm doing great. I actually had my let's see, I had a rehearsal for my only gig this month.
Really?
Yeah. So life is good. Yeah. I got to
Awesome.
play and play with some people for a few moments today. So it was good.
Awesome. These are mainly just questions about maybe kind of theoretical compositional standpoints and
Right.
whatnot. If
I
that
just
makes
realized
sense.
there you go. My video, for some reason my video wasn't working there. There you go.
Okay.
I
there you go.
apologize. Yeah.
No problem. No problem. Okay. Usually, I'm much better at arranging than I am actually composing.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering, like, when you're composing like a new piece, how long does it take for you to finalize the melody? Like, before you even start like arranging it, how long before like all the chords are figured out, like basic ones, and the melody and everything like that?
You know, a lot of it depends on how. I always talk about in the arranging process, which is the same as a compositional process. It depends on sort of the echelon of what I'm writing. If I'm writing something that is for the publishing company, for instance, for Doug Beach Music, if I'm writing original stuff for Doug Beach, I can't go too far off the deep end, especially if I'm writing a mid-level piece of music. So that usually is a fairly quick situation. Usually within a day, I can get the tune done, and then the arranging process starts. Mainly because I can't go too deep. Okay. However, if there's something that I'm writing that is for me or for a very high level group, or something I really care about that I really want to try to stretch myself a little bit, which I don't get the chance to do as much as I'd like, then the process can be pretty arduous because it's very easy to reach a total standstill. And then it's, you know, I have a really great idea, and then I'll work it out, you know, and then it'll literally stop, and I'll go, okay, what do I do next? The compositional process actually starts with the big band score. So in other words, instead of writing a song, which is a pretty typical thing, I do that a lot. But if I'm really trying to do something for me or something I really, really care about, I will actually start with the big band score. because that allows me a lot more possibilities. Then now it really opens everything up instead of just having the idea of like, okay, here's a melody, here are some chords. I can put a bass line to this, I can put some kicks. Now the orchestration process actually figures into the composition, which makes it much more interesting. The picture that I give to students whenever they're working things out, even if it's writing a counter melody to an existing arrangement or composition, is that now you start to turn a Rubik's Cube in your mind, and you start to go, okay, what can I do? Okay, and one of the first things we might consider is what would be the antithesis of what I just wrote? If I just wrote something very rhythmic in this section, maybe I should write something more flowing in the next section. If I wrote something that was full of tension, maybe I would make it be a little less tense harmonically in the next section. That's one way to go, And then a lot of it is just pure inspiration. We had a junior high jazz band in the 70s, which was not odd, but it was less typical in those days than it is now. So I've been playing big band music in that large ensemble since I was in 7th grade. And so I think what happened, the only thing I can figure out is that I started to amass these little bits of information that kind of sat somewhere in my brain. And I sort of amassed this whole library. And so I think the only thing I can, from a totally mathematical standpoint, I think what happens is I sort of access all those records, all those files. And my mind starts to go through and say, okay, who did you hear do this? And you try not to copy verbatim, but take the essence of what that person does and did, and then make it your own that fits with the character of what you're writing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
You said when you played jazz in junior high, was that your first like kind of exposure to that? Or
it was, yeah. I just played saxophone as a kid, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, like most kids do. Playing in the jazz band was just something that I thought there was something cool to do. And then the most unique experience I had that actually introduced me to the music for real, my director was, I think he was a pretty good saxophonist. I really don't recall hearing him all that much. But he actually played, I remember very well, he played Charlie Parker playing Loverman. And there was something about that, man, that just hit me. And it was like, that's what I want to do, and I was very directed from that point forward that I knew I wanted to be a musician. And I really like jazz. And I played classical music too. I love playing classical music too. I didn't have a lot of direction. That I come from, I grew up in Connellsville, Pennsylvania, a very small town about an hour southeast of Pittsburgh. And by the time I was in 9th grade, the teachers there told me, they said, you need to go to Pittsburgh. And my dad couldn't afford to take me to Pittsburgh for lessons. So I sort of floundered on my own and tried to find my way. But I mean, that's the great thing about that music specifically, is that you can really get a lot just from, if you learn how to listen to recordings and take from what you need. You don't necessarily need a formalized teacher. And so that's kind of what happened to me. I sort of floundered and found my way through high school,
Sometimes I find myself in a rut when arranging. Sometimes I come to a point where I go through like different options in my head, like say for 8 measures. And just everything I try, everything I hum in my head, I put it down. I'm like, no, I don't like that. I don't like that. So I was wondering if this happens to you, and if so, what can you do to get out of it?
Oh yeah. Well, so if you can manage to put a Band-Aid on it, in other words, by working through it and analyzing why you don't like it, then you can kind of, like I said, you can put a Band-Aid on it and back up as far as you need to. Maybe you need to back up, maybe it's of the 8 bars you've written, maybe only 2 of those are really relevant, and maybe the 6 need to be altered in some way. So that ability to analyze what you've done and say, okay, going beyond, and again, I'm with you, Francesco, I've done this 1,000 times, more than that, where I've said, okay, I don't like this. But the next question is, why don't I like it? And so when you can figure that out, then you can start to figure out whether or not you can fix what you have, or whether you need to just say, let's put this aside and save it for another day, as far as the idea. Okay, so we're working on this idea, and it's like, okay, so if I figured out why I don't like it, and the next thing is how to remedy that. Okay, beyond that, if you start playing with it too much, then maybe it's an idea of just saying, okay, I think we'll just put this away and try to go a whole different way. Now that's difficult because now what you've done is, to this point, what you've done is you've just linked that piece that you wrote that you don't like. That is now linked pretty indelibly in your mind to what you've written prior to that you like. Somehow cutting that off in your mind and saying, okay, I'm not going to use this now, but where might it go? That's not an easy task, man. That's not an easy thing to do because, like I said, if you're like me, the idea of the progression from one section of the music to another is, I mean, it's inherent to the music. That's what it does. That's the flow, you know? So all of a sudden we're just going to, you know, we're just going to chop that off and say, okay, no, I'm going to go in a different direction now. That's not an easy thing to do, you know? From a visceral, the visceral standpoint would be, what can I do differently then? If it's a larger scale thing, if it's not a matter of changing a few notes, maybe it's a matter of changing the concept of what's there. A less visceral way and more practical way is that, okay, let's, you know, so everything that we write sounds like somebody, okay? None of us is original. That's almost impossible, okay? So maybe if my inspiration has been drawn from Thad Jones, let's say I'm writing a song and I've really been thinking about Thad. Well, maybe I should go and listen to a whole bunch of Thad music and see what else I can kind of steal from that, you know, and that will lead me in a different direction. I'm still a big fan. I mean, I will never ever get my fill of Jim McNeely's music. I am just, if you've not listened to Jim McNeely's compositions, you need to do so, Francesco. It will change your mind, change your life, because he is so incredibly creative, you know. And he has. Have you ever heard of his stuff, Jim's stuff?
I have not, actually.
Oh man, okay, great. Okay, that's cool. Well, then that's a great journey for you to be on, man. So
in fact, if I would recommend one album to buy to really get you into McNeely, which was very helpful to you as a composer, is the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra's album Lickety Split. Jim wrote the entire album, and every track but one is an original composition. And the cool thing about it, he talks about, it's called the what if proposition. So he talks whenever he writes and teaches his students to write, he comes up with a what if proposition. And all of a sudden it's just what if, and the what if can be whatever you want it to be. So Lickety Split is an atonal funk tune, okay? And so his what if proposition is, what if Schoenberg and James Brown co-wrote a composition? So that's it, right? Exactly, right? Okay. Yeah. And then the what ifs are, and again, it's the what if is nothing in particular, but it's really great. You should definitely check that album out first, because you can actually read about Jim talking about his process. The other thing to do too is, from a book standpoint, there's a book that a lot of us used, and I still tell students to reference it. It's called Inside the Score. The original book is called Inside the Score, by a guy named Rayburn Wright. Rayburn Wright was at Eastman for years and years and years. And the cool thing is, he took 3 of Sammy Nestico's charts, 3 of Thad Jones' charts, and 3 of Bob Brookmeyer's charts from that time period, from the 70s. And he tore them apart, note by note, literally note by note. And so you get this really in-depth analysis of 9 pieces of music from 3 different writers. And anyway, Rick Lawn did an updated version of that with guys like Jim McNeely, Bob Mintzer, Vince Mendoza, James Darcy Argue, or Darcy James Argue, sorry, I went the wrong way with his name, and Maria Schneider. So some of the really creative souls who are out there writing these days, and it's a very interesting book. So those are good ways to get you kind of into the large scale side of the composition thing, you know. So, oh, there it is. Yeah, okay, good. So it's called Jazz Scores and Analysis, Volume 1. And it's put out by Shure Music, SAGR.
It's no secret that in more contemporary compositions, especially big band charts, tend to be very complicated.
Yes.
And some examples, I mean, like the works of Alan Baylock and Mike Crotty, Dave Liebman, and everything. They involve really dissonant harmonies, frequent rhythmic syncopation, changing meters, just some examples.
Right.
Incredibly impressive and sound amazing when done well. But some people may find themselves kind of lost in that because of how really out there it is. Do you think that is like, you know, their goal for people to get kind of lost in the music, kind of like this, I don't know, experience sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the music, I mean, in general, the music that we think of as jazz these days is much more complicated than it used to be ever. You know, I mean, the idea of multiple mixed meters are, you know, that's not unusual. And the idea of extended harmonies, and not necessarily, not extended is wrong. That's not really a correct term. Non-functional harmony that moves in a different way, you know, than we were used to. I mean, you know, the music has gotten more dissonant and more extended as we've gone on. And again, if we're to strive to be the most creative we possibly can, that would be where we would go. You know, we would try to take the listener on a journey, a very intense journey, you know. It's not unlike the classical realm, that this idea of jazz and classical music kind of being here, and they've been, you know, kind of gradually making their way, and now they're firmly ensconced in one another now, you know. And so there are quote unquote classical elements in jazz, and there are jazz elements in classical music too. I mean, it's undeniable now, even more so than it used to be. It used to be kind of a funny thing trying to combine those two, but now the composers in both idioms have the chops to exist in each other's idioms and combine them very, very well.
You're like your first ever compositions to like where you are now. How do you think you've evolved and changed?
I'm faster now.
yeah.
No, I tell the story whenever I first started to compose, and it was a big band thing. This is before we had notation programs. I remember very distinctly, I tell this story way too many times to all my students, of it taking me 8 hours to write 8 measures of music. I remember very well. It was something I was doing multiple lines converging on each other, and this is before again, being a non-composer trying to compose, or an untrained composer trying to compose, I should say it like that. I had a heck of a time realizing that the moving music will occasionally have moments of dissonance, but they're so momentary that it doesn't matter. In other words, if 2 lines are crossing, all of a sudden they're banging up against each other for a couple notes. It's okay, because they're going to leave that. I was literally taking a snapshot of every single half beat in each measure, saying, okay, here's what these lines are doing right here. And it's like, oh, wait, there's a dissonance here. I should try to fix this. And then of course, you know, computer notation came along, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, I don't have to worry about this now, because now I hear that it's fine, you know. I think I've gotten more adept at handling the ways I want harmony to go. I think I've gotten more adept at the songs that I write, most of which you haven't heard. The published stuff you've heard is much more inside. I mean, that's what the publishing companies want. I mean, I don't get to be uber creative, only on very few occasions, you know. But on those occasions I do, I know what the vocabulary is, you know. So that's what I think. That's how I've improved. I've really been a good student of the music, and I've tried to. So whenever I go to write something, I decide it's going to be something that is in this vein. I know what chords are usable and what chords are not usable. I know what rhythms I should do. I know what kind of grooves I should do, where I didn't at first. I would do some silly things because I didn't understand that this groove doesn't work with this kind of music, or this harmony does not belong in this kind of music. I find this in my students a lot. I have some really great students who will do reharmonizations or will compose, and they'll come up with like 4 or 5 really great bars. And all of a sudden, like 2 bars have some really funny, dumb little chords in them. And so, you know, my job is to point that out and say, okay, now understand that these 2 or 3 chords you have here don't fit. You need to find something that fits that's in the same density and the same manner of dissonance as what you've done. You know?
You also write for little big band format. I've always been kind of intrigued by this. There's something I can't really explain it, but it's something I really like about it. Something that's like it's kind of cool how it's more. I don't know. It's kind of like a chamber jazz ensemble. Mm-hmm. And I've tried like different things I feel like, oh, I think this will fit right here. But I find myself like, something tells me I got to think a little differently with this. Do you find yourself in that?
Absolutely. So the Little Big Band is my favorite group to write for. I've had the opportunity to go beyond once again going past the published stuff. We actually had a functional 10-set for a while, and it was just amazing fun to write for that. I enjoyed that more than the big band. I've done enough big band stuff now that, again, there are still things to discover in the big band, but I mean, I don't know that there's too much more that we can do. Okay, just because it's been done. But if we go back to the Little Big Band, it's like, so you're exactly right. It is a chamber ensemble, but it also has the power of a big band if you know how to write for it. And so that's one of the beauties of it, and also the fact that you have 8 less musicians than you do in a typical big band. You now sort of have thinned out the herd now, and you have 10 people who are really, really great players, most of whom can solo. And so now it becomes this interesting amalgam of a small group and a big band. And you can actually control it in both ways as the arranger. One of the parts that I really like about it is the puzzle aspect of it. Okay, so how can I make this sound like a saxophone solely if I only have 3 saxes? How can I make this sound like a big shout chorus with a lead trumpet up, on top of the staff? And how do I spread those notes out so that it doesn't sound too thin, that it actually has that same kind of depth, So it's the puzzle part of that, which I'm sure, going back to my own formation as a writer, I remember very well being intrigued. Whenever I was a freshman in college, I played baritone sax in the Duquesne Jazz Ensemble. I actually graduated from Duquesne University, where I teach here. And as a baritone player, sitting on the very edge of the band, playing at the bottom, I was intrigued by the puzzle aspect of the music, how the trumpet parts fit with the saxophone parts and the trombone parts, and how everything kind of turned into this very interlocking puzzle. And so now that same puzzle is presented to us with only 6 horns or 7 horns, depending on what you do, which configuration you write for. And now trying to combine those, okay, what kind of timbres can we get out of that now? Because one of the nice things about not having a full section is that now we are combining some interesting timbres and getting some different sounds out of it. So, but yeah, I enjoy writing for the Little Big Band immensely. I miss it. It's been a few years since we've had a functioning Little Big Band here, but I enjoy writing for that group immensely.
Criterion's Jazz Ensemble, our director, Jonathan Maganese, he's very much like, take the music, explore as many possibilities as there could be. It's not like too egregious with it to the point where it completely changes the chart. That's not how it goes.
Right.
Naturally, our lead trombone player, he's student teaching now, and he told, we had a meeting and he told the story of how he kind of translated it to the high school jazz ensemble, where he's just like, I don't know, just trying different things. And the band director said, you're giving him too many possibilities to think about, just stick to the chart. Do you think that maybe it can be necessary for maybe like younger ensembles, for charts to have less restrictions, like less information in them? So like maybe in the solo section, just for them to explore more possibilities at a younger age?
Yeah, I think it's very good. Again, this is we're into a touchy subject, as in if we had a lot of great high school jazz directors out there who understand the music, then it would be really easy to have this happen. And again, this situation you're describing is a utopian one, and there are groups out there that are like that, even at the younger levels. But so many directors have not had adequate training in the idiom, and so they're afraid to go off the page. But this is admirable. I mean, the idea of the sooner you get off the page and understand the idea of being creative that's so incredibly important. There are people who have not had adequate jazz training, and so they're afraid, they're not quite sure what to do. And so this is where you are, like your student teacher friend, where there are too many possibilities out there. And again, if the kids haven't been brought up in this environment, then it's difficult. Now, having said that, if your student teacher friend had the time and the actual director was open enough to let that student teacher play around with the music a little bit and get the students attuned to the idea, I think they would find it incredibly satisfying. Now, the difficulty here, and again, this is just being honest, is that once that student teacher leaves, will the director continue in that same vein? And so that's where we lose it. That's the shame, because there are lots of great student teachers who are coming out, like obviously in your program, who really have a lot on the ball and have had really great experiences, and try to invest that kind of exploratory nature into a jazz band, a high school jazz band that they're student teaching. But it's scary to a lot of the directors, because that's just a totally foreign world to them. They're on the page. That's the classical realm, for the most part, is still an on the page realm. And the idea of going off is a scary thing, for them. So it's interesting. But I think, I think given, if we had this utopian situation, then I would say, yeah, that it would be great if jazz bands at an early age, at the junior high level, would start kind of playing around with open solos and cueing backgrounds whenever it seemed right, and not worrying about, okay, here's a 120 measure piece of music. We're going to play 120 measures. And we're going to play it exactly as it's written.
I feel my soloing in a big band setting is much different than it is in a combo. And with this, I think it's because when big bands, there's backgrounds in the horns, there's just a straight up larger sound and more specificity in colors and textures and everything like that. So yeah. I'll tend to plan out my solo a little more just to see what fits. And it's I want this here at the solo break, and this will sound good with the backgrounds. And a lot of times, yeah, it really works and everything like that. But do you think that sort of sacrifices true musical expression, and because it's definitely more calculated than it is letting the music speak for itself?
Yeah, you're on the money. I've said this many times. I love to solo in a small group. I really, in most cases, I don't like to solo that much in a big band, especially on my own charts. Because even though I'm trying to create, I'm also trying to listen to what's happening here and behind me in the band, and if they're playing things correctly, especially whenever I go out to do things with a band I've never met before. Are they pulling off all the backgrounds that I wrote? Are they playing this well? And I get distracted. I get very very easily distracted. Now, if it's not mine, but you're exactly right. It can be very hindering to play a solo in a big band, because of these backgrounds. These backgrounds, in other words, you have to be careful. There's so many things to take into consideration. In a small group, the music happens as it does and it progresses. However, in the big band, when you're in that small group setting, whenever you started your solo, and the backgrounds will eventually come in, if you've actually worked the intensity up beyond where the backgrounds are going to come in from an intensity standpoint, you can't back down. That's very odd. So it's almost like you need to kind of need to turn the temperature up just enough so that whenever the backgrounds finally come in, that you're at that same intensity level where they are, and then, like you said, we start to find those pieces where we're going to get swallowed by the backgrounds. And so do we just lay out, or do we play something that we play like a long note over that, so that we're not messing around with the backgrounds or conflicting with the backgrounds? And we're forced, usually because of the way the climax points always work, we're definitely forced into, at some point, moving ourselves up to that highest intensity point along with the backgrounds. And maybe we didn't want to do that.
Another thing that the lead trombonist said is he's also an arranger.
Okay.
He says he commonly finds himself there's a piece, there's something he always goes back and redoes it, and then sends it back, and then redoes it when there's another error brought up. And I found this. I did an arrangement of Dewey Square, Charlie Parker, and when went to Criterion, a first time hearing of the big band, sounded great. The thought that I wanted was executed, and I was yes, I really like this. But then there's little technical things maybe in the comping and the piano part, and there's that he points out. I'm crap, well, I'm going to go back and do that again, send it back. So, but then Professor Raganese said the way that you learn the best is not by just going back and just completely fixing it, but rather just, quantity, just continue pumping out these things. Do you agree?
Total agreement. Yeah. It's a good example goes back to the great Phil Woods, the great alto saxophonist Phil Woods. Phil talked about he composed a piece of music every day of his life. And he said most of them did not see the light of day, but it was the idea of composing that was important to him because he was practicing composition. Yeah, I'll go back. I mean, I hate, every once in a while I have to go back into my charts, and I just hate doing that because I'll find things, it's like, oh, why did I do that? That's really stupid. And that was just because at that moment, that's what I decided to do. And maybe 3 years down the line, after I've looked at it again, maybe I would think differently, but that was kind of what was in the moment. If there are some really egregious ones, yeah, you should fix those. If they're put it this way, if you're going to play the chart, a couple times a week or something like that, then yeah, you have to fix it for your own well-being. Otherwise, it's going to like gnaw at you, right? But the idea of moving on and saying, okay, I'll make sure I won't do that in this next piece of music. I'll take more care in writing the bass line or this line here and there. Yeah, I've had the ability to go back in and fix something, and I have, but I mean, I don't, same thing. I think it's out there, and I can't, it's just not worth going back time and time again to go fix everything, because otherwise now we're starting to obsess over it, and instead of moving forward, like your director said, instead of moving forward and writing something new that gives you new experiences, now you just keep revisiting the same thing.
Well, thank you very much for this. This meant
Yeah, man.
to me.
My pleasure, Francesco. Yeah. This has been enjoyable for me too. I love talking about stuff, man. It's very, very, very cool, man. You ask you some great questions. So
This was such a terrific experience. A huge thank you and shout out to Professor Tomaro for being a part of this. It really meant quite a bit to me. This was an amazing opportunity. Again, any of you at home, if you like jazz, if you like big band and stuff like that, I highly encourage you to check out his music. I will post links in the description to buy his CDs. In the description as well, there will be a link to the full-length interview if you feel so inclined to watch it. Naturally, I had to cut out quite a bit from this video, but in the full-length one, there's a little more depth to what we discuss. There's a couple history lessons about, different jazz artists and whatnot. There's more questions asked. The whole shebang. So thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed just as much as I did, and I'll see you next time.